So let's do a little recap about what we talked about last month, I guess it was. We were talking about the two truths, and those two truths being the relative, or as I was discussing before, that term has some more layers of meaning, like fictitious truth or obscured truth, something like that. And we'll get do a little more recap on that. And then the ultimate truth. So in brief, what those are is the kind of ordinary way that we experience things in our unenlightened state versus the actual nature of those things that would be seen in the experience of an enlightened being. So we often talk about that our ordinary perception is one of seeing things, but we don't see that those things don't actually exist as they appear to us, and that ultimate reality is something that, to someone who is experiencing it, it actually exists as it appears. So let me give you an example for what that might mean. So for us, this is going to be a little bit far out, and I'm going to be expanding on this topic, but when we see things, we see everything as if it was permanent, singular, and independently existing. So, for example, we talked about this last month, so hopefully this isn't entirely foreign, and for some of you who weren't here last month, I'll try and catch you up. But we can talk about the conventional kind of existence of something as simple as this table. So conventionally speaking, it appears to our mind as something singular. A table is a table. It's not a bunch of things. It is one thing. And we think ordinarily that we see a table. When I see this with my eyes, I think I see a table. But in terms of ultimate level of truth, what I'm actually seeing, even conventionally, isn't a table. I see the shape and color of some wood. So a table is just an idea that I have about some visual things that I see. That's even just a surface level. That's not even getting to emptiness or ultimate truth. But ultimately speaking, we do some kind of analytic process to find out what this ultimate truth is. It doesn't always have to be through an analytic process, but generally when you're explaining the two truths through an analytic way, we have to talk about there being a general way things appear to us, and then some kind of investigative method to find out what they are in reality. So we would often talk about breaking things down, analyzing what's actually there. So when we see a table, we have the top of a table. With this table in particular, there's a drawer on this table. There are legs on this table, sides to the table, a front and a back, a top. So I might ask you, where's the table? And you might say, well, it's all of that. I'll say, then, is the table a multiplicity? Or is it a singular thing? This is something called the reasoning of being neither singular nor multiple. So you might want to say, oh, it's multiple. But then I would say, multiple of what? So a multiplicity has to be a multiplicity of singular things. So I have to find where is that singular thing. So you say, okay, well, the legs are the multiple things, the sides are the multiple thing, the top. Then I try and find where's the truly existing, independently existing leg. And I break that down even further. I say, okay, well, there's a top to the leg, there's a bottom to the leg, there's a side to the leg, there's a front to the leg. Or going down even further, I can talk about all the atoms that make up the leg. And then I try and find a singular atom that even makes that up. Because without a singular, like I was saying before, you can't even talk about a multiplicity. Like you can't talk about a group of people without having individual people. So I break it down so much that I can't even find the constituent parts, a truly existing, independently existing constituent part of something called a table, let alone a table. So in the same way, when we talk about the selflessness of a person, you might say, okay, I am Justin. I was born 44 years ago, and I have lived up to now. And there's like this idea that there's this ongoing, permanent entity called Justin that has existed since then and still exists now. But when we examine what that is, there's a body, and there's a consciousness, and there's a lot of sub-processes within that consciousness, like feeling, perception, emotions, intentions, thoughts. And all of those things are changing moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. So there's no actually truly existing, permanently existing Justin that ever existed. There's just a constantly changing group of things. Even then, the idea of Justin itself, you might say, okay, well, I have my body. I can think about my ears, my eyes, my face, my hands, my internal organs. And then when I go through my consciousness, like my feelings, my emotions, my identities, my name, my thoughts, all of those things as well, I keep finding my things that are supposedly mine, but I never find the me who is supposedly controlling or possessing those things. So these are the types of analytic processes that one would go through to determine or to bring oneself to an experience, or initially maybe just an intellectual understanding of emptiness, that is the ultimate reality. So still conventionally, I can understand that there's no truly independently existing Justin, while at the same time I can still refer to myself. I can say, I'm Justin, please bring me a glass of water. So that understanding of, or even experience or realization of, the lack of a truly independently existing Justin doesn't wash my brain of ordinary language and an ability to talk to people in a normal way. So when we're talking about these two truths, from one perspective, we talk about them as two things, because you kind of have to talk about them in that way. And also the level of consciousness that engages with each is different. So kind of an ordinary, dualistic, unenlightened state of mind is the kind of consciousness, or the level of consciousness, which is experiencing and engaging with conventional reality. It itself is also conventional reality, that ordinary, unenlightened mind, dualistic mind. And then ordinary mind cannot see the ultimate truth. So this gets into some other side topics of Buddhist philosophy and practice, but essentially they say that ordinary mind is dualistic and it's conventional. And because it is dualistic, it cannot see a non-dual reality, which is what ultimate truth is. And I'll talk a little bit more later when I talk about kind of the stages by which one would experience ultimate truth, what non-dual means. That might just be like a vague term to you, or something you've heard in Buddhist jargon, but maybe have never really connected what that really means. So, once again, conventional truth, or I prefer the more literal rendering of that term, which is fictitious truth or obscured truth. The reason why it's called fictitious or obscured is because it is a reflection of our own habituation and conditioning. It's not an experience of authentic reality as it is. It's always kind of obscured by a projection of our own dualistic mind, of our own karmic patterns. So like taking that back a step again, I showed how, maybe I didn't really show, but I demonstrated what the logic might be to find that this table doesn't independently exist. However, the mind that directly experiences that is only what we would call, let's not worry about what it's called, but it's a non-dual state of consciousness. And our ordinary state of consciousness, ordinary unenlightened dualistic state of consciousness, is what sees this as something singular and independently existing. That's the way it's experienced by our ordinary mind. So therefore, that sense of it being permanent, singular, independently existing is actually a contrivance. It is a projection that is actually obscuring our experience of what's actually there, or what is the genuine ultimate reality. So that's why it's called conventional truth, or fictitious or obscured truth. So now, okay, I understand why it's obscured. Why is it truth? What does that mean? Doesn't that just sound oxymoronic to say fictitious truth or obscured truth? It's true because to the person who hasn't experienced ultimate reality, it feels true, it looks true, and it even functions in a way that is quote-unquote true. For example, if I plant a rose seed, a rose flower is going to grow, and a corn plant's not going to grow. So that is conventionally true. That is, according to the conventional truth, that is something that we can kind of rely upon to a certain extent. So that's why it's called conventional truth. And also because we grasp at it as being true. We think that that's true, ultimately, but it's not. So when someone is experiencing things in that way, then everything that they're doing, because they're still believing that everything's true in the sense of independently existing and so forth, and they themselves as a subject, they also see that or experience that as something that truly exists in a permanent, singular, and independently existing way. Everything that they're doing is placing more habits, more conditioning on their consciousness to keep doing that, to keep experiencing things in that way. And so that's what's meant by creating karma, and that's what's meant by the suffering of all pervasive conditioned existence when you talk about the three kinds of suffering. That as long as you're still fixating on a truly existing self, truly existing object, truly existing action, that kind of thing. Often if you get into teachings on ultimate reality, they'll use this jargon term called the three spheres. Say that if an action is done, for example, in the context of the six perfections, we can talk about an act of ordinary generosity versus the perfection of generosity. So an ordinary act of generosity is one in which I still believe that there is a truly existing me as the agent or the giver, a truly existing object, or you could sometimes say the action of giving, and a truly existing being who would receive that gift, or who is even maybe in need of that gift, something like that. And as long as those kind of fixations are still there, then that's still virtuous in the sense that it's creating more positive habits and maybe reducing the force of our negative habits like greediness, miserliness, selfishness, fixation, grasping, like at our own interest. But it's still karmic. It's still creating karma and ultimately still obscuring us from experiencing reality in its unconditioned or unauthentic state. So let me try and connect that a little bit more. When we talk about this so-called authentic state or unconditioned state, or what it might be to exist without conditioning, then we're talking about Buddha nature. So in Mahayana Buddhism, one of the most common topics and really emphasized in our tradition is that all beings have Buddha nature, and that your true nature, like the nature of your mind, of all beings, is actually equal to that of a Buddha. And that the process of so-called gaining enlightenment or so-called making spiritual progress isn't one of gaining something new or getting smarter, but it's actually one of removing obscurations and removing the things that are obscuring you from just being what you already were in the first place, in your most natural state, in your most fundamental state of being. You're already a fully enlightened Buddha. And so the practice of the path, I guess you would say, is not one of learning new things necessarily. That can be part of it, but it's generally talked about as one of removing obscuration and revealing what was already there. So a common example of that is the sun and the clouds. So the sun is always there, shining just as bright whether there's a cloud there or not, right? So like you're taking that as the example, your Buddha nature is fully resplendent, actual Buddha, fully enlightened Buddha, all the qualities, all the wisdom, all the love, all the power of a Buddha. But because of not recognizing that and then falling into this fixation of a truly existing self, truly existing objects of my experience, all of those things, I start making this pattern of conditioning, of habituating. And instead of living in the spontaneous, present, natural flow of enlightened mind, I'm now actually obscuring that with conditioning and habituation through this process of karmic formation. So then, in this path of this so-called experience of or practice of the ultimate truth, what you're doing is trying to see through to the source of that fixation, remove it to get back to an experience of what was already there, this so-called natural state of Buddha nature. So one term that's often used is that the result of Buddhahood is not an actual cause and effect result. My action didn't create Buddhahood, because Buddhahood was already there. So my action of practice actually was just something that separated the obscurations from the Buddhahood that was already there. So you don't need to create enlightenment for yourself, according to Mahayana Buddhism. You just need to discover it's already there, and then work at cleaning it off. So Namchak Khen Rinpoche uses an example really regularly that I really like about this, which is washing dishes. So he says that the act of washing dishes is almost like you could think of it in the same way that we think of the practice of the path and kind of recognizing your own Buddha nature. So he says you would never start actually washing the dishes if you didn't believe that there wasn't a truly pure dish under that dirt, under the food. And so by knowing that there's a pure dish there, you'll go through the effort of washing it. And so one of the really important things when you get more serious about the path, and there's more teachings about this in terms of the ultimate truth and Buddha nature, is to gain a conviction in your own Buddha nature, to really believe that. In a lot of the teachings, like the Ornament of Precious Liberation of Gampopa, the very first topic in the book is Buddha nature. The very first topic is, you have Buddha nature. Now what are you going to do about it? So then he talks about how to rely upon a spiritual teacher, the preciousness of human birth, suffering of samsara, the six perfections, bodhicitta, refuge, all that kind of stuff. So it's considered by many teachers in the Tibetan tradition, in the Buddhist traditions in general, a really crucial feature to gain some kind of trust, some kind of experience, some kind of belief in this fundamental pure Buddha nature.